Hello and welcome to the Charlie Paparelli Show. I'm Charlie Paparelli, and today we're going to be talking about driving results as a dare to serve leader. Our purpose is to help entrepreneurs succeed, and we do this by inviting great business leaders to share their stories. To be sure not to miss an episode, please subscribe at paparelli.com. Simply submit your email address. You'll receive my weekly interview, and as a bonus, my Tuesday morning blog for entrepreneurs. I'm Charlie Paparelli. I've been an angel investor for over 30 years, and during that time, I've learned from entrepreneurs how to start businesses from scratch and grow them into valuable enterprises. My guest today is Cheryl Bachelder. Cheryl is the former CEO of AFC Enterprises, the parent company of Popeye's Louisiana Kitchen. She led a turnaround of the restaurant chain, achieving a 6x return over a 10-year period. She currently serves on 3 high-profile corporate boards and 1 nonprofit board. She built a successful corporate career and family. She is also the author of, and I'm showing this book backwards, I'm sorry it shows this way, Dare to Serve, How to Drive Superior Results by Serving Others. So welcome, Cheryl, and thanks for being with me.
Be with you today, Charlie.
Well, have I been looking forward to this? Why don't we start with just kind of what you're up to these days?
Well, my life today, I left my CEO role at Popeyes 5 years ago, so I'm in a new stage of life that includes board service, community service, and more time and margin for family and friends.
Well, one of the things that you talked about in your book is you like to do these, to be involved with these high level, these big goals, if you will. You like excitement. You like things to be just a little out of reach. I'm not finding the right word for it. And I wonder, when you get to this stage in life, how do you feed that need, if you will?
Well, what you're referring to in my life is a sense of adventure and, yes, excitement.
There you go.
I can tell you exactly where it comes from. My mother. I have been traveling with my mother since I was a toddler. My mother was not afraid of anything and not afraid to go anywhere. I'll give you an example. At the age of 11, she took me to Europe with the Frommer book, $5 at Europe on $5 a day. We rode buses, we walked, we stayed in little bed and breakfast, and we lived on $5 a day. So that spirit.
I think the $5 a day was supposed to be per person. I didn't.
We spent more than that in total, and what you learn from that is, I'm really not afraid. I'm not afraid to go places. I'm not afraid to create my own adventures. So even at this stage of life, if I feel that sense of, staleness, perhaps, I love to travel, and I love to learn, and I love just new experiences. So I just in January, I decided to take golf lessons, which frankly I refused to do my whole career. I thought it took too much time. I wanted nothing to do with it. But now it's an adventure, right? Next year I want to go to Israel. That will be my adventure next year. So I think my husband would tell you, if I don't have adventure in my life, I make it up. So.
Yeah, so you're always looking for it and nosing around for it. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Israel. Kathy wants to go to Israel. She's just it's funny, all the places that we've been, we've never been to Israel. That's and I think that's a shame, for based on our faith, to see it actually in action and see all that history. I'm really looking forward to doing that someday. So you'll have to report back to me when you do it, if you get there first. But tell me about your mom and dad a little bit. You mentioned your mother, that she was so adventurous. Your dad had to allow her that too. I mean, if he was going to say, yeah, just go ahead, take our daughter at 11 years old, and, I'm too busy to leave, but why don't you have a good time?
Well, that is one way my parents were very well matched, is they both had a spirit of adventure. They expressed it a little differently. My mother did love to travel the world and explore. My dad went into the technology industry, which is its own kind of adventure. He moved to Silicon Valley like the first year Silicon Valley began. And he watched the industry transform itself from transistors to integrated circuits to chips. He was the manufacturing guy in that industry and learned how to make those things in high volumes. And of course, eventually they lived in Asia for many, many years making chips. So my dad had that, wanted to be.
Did you guys move there when you were in, like, you're talking late 60s?
We moved to Silicon Valley in the mid 60s. And we moved to Asia in my senior year of high school, which would have been 1974. And they lived there for 14 years. And so, yes, we went to California before it was cool, and we went to Asia before there was even telephone service to Asia. So,
were both your parents college graduates?
They both graduated from Indiana University. They met on campus. My dad was a houseboy in my mother's sorority house.
Okay. He was an engineer then? Yeah. And what did your mom? What was her degree?
My mother was a school teacher, and so had her mother been. And so she was a very devoted teacher. She particularly liked the little ones, 3, 4, 5, 6. Loved to teach reading, and she still does to this day. And so she had very much the learner and the teacher in her.
Were you an only child?
I was the oldest, so I was the only child for 4 years. My siblings said I never stopped acting like an only child. But I have 2 sisters that are 4 and 5 years younger, and a brother who's 9 years younger. As a tribute to my parents, I will tell you, my siblings are in their own right very successful business leaders. Each of them has run a company or a hospital or an industry, and done so with much talent and impact. And so
your sisters too, they took this business route like you did? Be a business leader?
My next sister founded and sold 2 software companies. She's an entrepreneur like many of those you mentioned. And my next sister has been the CEO of a regional hospital for the last 25 years. And my brother has been the leader of environmental engineering companies.
Well, when you look back to your upbringing, you're sort of Midwest, right? So you must be from Indiana, right? Because your parents got state tuition there. All right. So what's interesting is it would make logical that, your mother's mother was a teacher. She was a teacher. You would think that the expectation would have been, you're a teacher. Okay. And that, because you were in that point there where, did women actually lead? Or did women were they really just to serve, if you will? So, the sort of the nurse, the female, what we know as traditional female roles. But you were in that catalytic time.
Yes,
there's no
doubt. I can tell you when I was a senior in high school, I went to my guidance counselor. He had me take that career vocation test. And he told me, Cheryl, you can be a librarian, a nurse, or you can teach piano lessons. Those were my 3 career paths.
What was the second one?
A nurse, a librarian, or a piano teacher.
When you said nurse, I thought you said nerd. I went. That's why I had to get that right. Okay, so a nurse.
So
all righty.
The test was organized around traditional female careers. So I never did take the other version of the test to find out what that would have looked like. But I actually did go to music school for the first year of college. I studied piano because I had a fabulous high school music teacher. I sang 2 or 3 choirs, performed all over the country with that group, and really came to know and respect a great music teacher. So that guidance counselor and that test had some impact. But by the time I got to...
But it also shows the impact of a great teacher, and how they can shape our lives. They can actually turn us in a direction, That's great that you pursued that. So what happened, though?
The first part of it was that choir director that I so admired, he said, "Why don't you audition to music school?" And he suggested Indiana had one of the best music schools in the country. Well, I thought that was a long shot for sure. I played the piano well, but mostly as an accompanist, not as a performing arts person.
Mm-hmm.
And so he said, "Let's tape an audition. We'll see it, send it in, see what happens." I was shocked when I got into that music school because it is renowned for developing some of the world's best pianists in the world. So I felt like I had to go and find out what that meant, right? Learn what that experience was about. What I found out, though, is I was not designed to practice piano alone in a closet 8 hours a day. I'm very much an extrovert. And so it was very lonely. The sense of adventure was lacking. It was boring. And it was really over my head in terms of capability. I was never going to be Van Cliburn. So after my freshman year, I told my very successful father that I was dropping out of college. And he
Oh my God!
said, "There's a lot of things."
Like, I'll tell you, I have an oldest, and she happens to be a daughter, and I know exactly what your father was thinking when he got that. Okay, go ahead.
There's a lot of things that can happen, but dropping out is not one of them. And so we had several more conversations, and he said, "You're going to pick something, and you're going back to school." So I did. I went to Hong Kong and spent the summer with my dad and mom in this frankly bad mood about not wanting to go back to school. My dad took me with him on business trips all over Asia, showed me what he was doing for a living. And it was the beginning.
What a great experience.
But and by the way, nobody did that at the time either, right? Everybody thought it was weird that he was traveling with his daughter in Asia. Women didn't travel. But my dad just marched us on. We toured factories. We met people. We went to dinners. And in the process, he showed me how exciting business was, what an impact you could have on people. He showed me why he was so passionate about his work.
Do you remember on that tour, do you remember any particular experience, one that just clicked with you in effect, Because we see a lot of things. And then there's things that we attach to as young adults like that. You're 19 years old.
Exactly. I think the thing that I remember most from that trip is his company sent him to Korea to teach Gold Star Electronics how to manufacture the things that he did for National Semiconductors. So he was going on kind of a mission to teach people in Korea how to build electronics plants. So he took me into these big plants that at the time, I believe they were making televisions. But they had ambitions, to get into all the computers and the electronics and that of the future. And to see how excited they were that my father would invest in them was really a big impression. To see how they honored him for his expertise and his business acumen. We spent a couple of days there. We had dinner with people each evening. And just watching my father invest in this country, really, of young, ambitious engineers wanting to do what he did. I think that's probably where I caught the bug about the power of leadership to influence other people's lives, right? Because my father gave many, many people the opportunity to come into this fast-growing industry, and he loved growing the company, building more factories, all the things that provided opportunities for people living at the time in countries where it was very hard to make a meaningful wage.
Yeah, you mentioned in your book something I thought was pretty interesting about all my life, I've always been about leadership. And here you are talking about when it became more obvious to you, watching your father as a leader and seeing the respect and attention that he was getting as a leader.
Well,
and as an effect, and what he was there for was to
Yes,
serve,
he was.
which was also interesting.
Well, and the other part of it, my father was willing to tell me everything that was going on in his mind in business. And I tell young parents this all the time, go home from work and tell your children about the day, not like the mechanics of how you settle the accounts and accounting, but tell them about the experiences, tell them about the people you interacted with, tell them about the difficult choices you made that lined up with your values. That's what my parents did. Every dinner table was, let's talk about the day, what we learned, and there was always, I would say, kind of a moral of the story for us to absorb out of their life experience. And I really believe
that is phenomenal advice. I have not heard anybody. When I grew up and my father was a blue collar worker. So when I didn't even know what business was, you were that far ahead of me, in all of that. But it is interesting that fathers do come home and they don't talk about, or mothers or fathers come home and talk about what their day's been like and what they do and what they love and why they do what they love, but kids are interested in those interactions that you're talking about. Very beneficial. Very beneficial.
You think they're absorbing. I really believe that. I believe children take in far more than we give them credit for, and allowing them to follow you around on a Saturday at the office or on a business trip. I now have several young friends that always take one of their children with them on a speaking trip when they're going to speak to a conference and those kind of things. And I really admire that.
Was that because of your advice?
I don't know. In part, I'm sure other people give that advice too, but I think people are thinking a little bit more about how you integrate family and work and allow your children a little bit of a view in.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, what did your parents do? Your parents did that with you. They seemed like your father was pouring into you. So by the time you finished that summer with him in Asia, then you went from, I don't want to go back to school, to now I have a reason to go back to school?
Yes, absolutely.
So what was it like when you went back to IU then at that point? Here I am, a one-year music major. Now what?
Well, to be honest, I looked around and said, what other schools are good here? Meaning departments. And I focused on the business school because of these conversations I'd had with my dad. But they also had what was called an honors program. One of the problems with Indiana University for me, it was huge. There were 40,000 students there. So it was hard to find your place. But at the business school, they had an honors program with about 24 students in it. And what that meant is we were going to get our bachelor's in business and our MBA in a combination degree. So in my sophomore year, wow, I started in that program and was able to get my bachelor's and MBA in the same time it would have taken me to get a bachelor's degree.
That's fabulous. So when you come out of college, well, one last question I had, and this is about the other three kids, your siblings. How did your parents, one thing for your parents to give you that level of attention, and how did they had that same influence, it seems, on your two sisters and your brother?
Well, I think they had the same values. For example, my parents came from, my father from a small farm town, my mother from the city of Gary, Indiana, the steel mill town. And they had very much the Midwestern work ethic. And so all of us learned the work ethic. What was expected. Largely the way they taught that was to work hard in school. If we struggled in a subject in school, it was okay to struggle, but it was not okay to get an F. So you had to figure it out. And I think those same values, whether it was faith or it was hard work or it was collaborating with others, they held for all the kids. But I would tell you there were differences. The youngest is always the most different, right? Because by then parents are tired. And there's usually more resources. My brother was his entire school career was in Asia because he was only 7 when they moved there. So his life included climbing the mountains in Nepal, the Himalayas. He went hiking in the Himalayas most school breaks. His senior trip, I believe, was to Bali. He had traveling experiences, far more interesting than the ones that I took. And he's therefore even more of an adventurous spirit. So
why didn't the younger one, the youngers have they have less restrictions too. It's sort of their, it's sort of, we've learned on Cheryl. We've had high expectations. We beat her up. We made sure that she was going to be great. By the time you get to the fourth one, like you're saying, and we've got 4 children too, is you're just like, it's okay. He's going to be okay, right? Why didn't he turn into a professional sort of guide or something, after, you see what I'm saying? Why did he get into business? Very odd.
He turned into a surfboard guy in California. And we've laughed about that because he did like California dreaming. I don't know, except it goes back to expectations. And I think expectations are a really important topic in leadership, and I think they are in the home. I really believe children and adults kind of aspire to what's expected of them. And my parents didn't have crazy, they never told us, you have to be a surgeon or you have to get a PhD. They never were that directive, but they always said you should do your best and you should work hard and you shouldn't flunk.
Yeah.
So I think
I do agree with you. I do agree with you on that. If you lead with high expectations, it makes a huge difference. Okay, huge difference. I've had people tell me this, that they said it was. I don't. They say, some of them say, I enjoyed working with you. Okay, when I was a leader in business, and they said, because you always had me do better than I thought I could actually do. That you always expected more of me, that you saw that in me. And I think that we did that with. I don't know if that was something. It wasn't something I decided. I guess it was something that I just did. It's maybe the way that God made me in that regard. But it sure did pay off. I do have high expectations for myself.
Yes,
I know that. It's kind of pushing. Yeah. So before we get into leadership, as you're starting to move, now that you got your business degree and your MBA combined, is part of being a leader is your values, and part of values are structured during this faith training that we might have, or faith influence that we have growing up. So what was yours? How did faith play a role in your family?
Well, I would tell you the first way that it played a role is both sets of grandparents were deeply faithful. My mother's parents were Presbyterian. My father's parents were Methodist. But they were not just church attendees. They were elders, and they were involved in charitable events. And my grandmother sang every Sunday at church. And the church, the Bible, small groups, we would call them today. Back then it wasn't called a small group, but your friends that were from church were extremely formative to our family. And to this day, my 2 grandmothers might be the most important people in my faith development. They constantly suggested things to read. My dad's mother constantly cited scripture as the answer to every question I had, and she would let me ask every question that I had. They were both very seminal in the development of my faith. Now, in my family, we went to church. We, of course, at middle school and high school, joined the youth groups. There was always a youth pastor in our life and teaching in that fashion. We came to accept Christ in a fairly traditional way. For me, it was the 8th grade confirmation class. I always say,
what faith were you? What religious faith did you practice?
We were in a congregational church at that point in time. We moved a lot, so sometimes we were Presbyterian, sometimes we were Methodist. In middle school, I was Congregationalist. Didn't know what that meant much, but
so what happened in 8th grade?
Class.
Confirmation. So that's the first time that you receive
Yes,
the body and blood of Christ, that
yes, it
sacrament,
was
if
a
you will.
sacrament, and you had to, testify that you were ready to surrender your life to Christ, and you had to give a short testimony in front of the church.
That's
It
it.
was very meaningful because of that. Of course, in eighth grade, you're not very confident, so it was scary. But you had to really think, and you had to write your notes and talk about.
Do you remember preparing for that? Here you are, a 14-year-old, 13, 14-year-old young lady. Tell me about that. How did you prepare for that?
Being kind of the good student child, it was reviewing the premises that we've been taught, looking at Bible verses to choose the ones that really had strong meaning for me. Luckily, being an extrovert, I probably was less fearful about public speaking than a lot of kids that age. But yes, it was, I treated it like writing a paper at the end of a class, how to summarize what I've learned and talk about it publicly. Probably one of my very first public speaking experiences.
Did part of that, was it why you're doing this? Sort of why are you submitting yourself to Christ? At 13 years old, as a young lady like this, who really seems to be the perfect daughter, okay, how do you incorporate this idea of, we're sinners who need a savior and all that? Was that what was taught to you? Was that sort of the substance of it, which is what we know as the gospel?
Yes, I was taught a very straightforward gospel, with the premise that I am a sinner and in need of Christ's redemption. But I think I was also taught the power and strength of a personal relationship with Christ in your life. Probably my child thinking around that is, I don't want to do life alone. It was probably a simple thought in that vein of, I want to do life with God and not alone. Because even at 14, I'd seen some of the struggles in life. And so, a family member passing away, or sickness and a good friend, and my parents reiterating the importance of our faith and getting us through those trials and difficult times. And so it probably, as I look back on it, I was such a conscientious and responsible child. I think I thought it was conscientious and responsible to bring Jesus into my life.
So then you go through high school, and then off to college. You always hear when people talk about as adults telling their stories of their faith, it's they always say, well, of course, when I got to college, I kind of went off the rails. Was that true for you too, as far as your faith was concerned?
I would say I was less focused on growing in my faith in college, but I was very aware of it, meaning I still did studied on my own. I still went to church on Sundays. I still surrounded myself with other people that practiced the faith. I was a little suspicious of the real outgoing evangelist types from Campus Crusade or InterVarsity. I thought they were a little much, to be honest. I have a lot of respect for them today.
Why was it that you felt that way then? Do you remember?
I just thought they were kind of groupie, a little too, groupie and a little too strident.
A little too enthusiastic? Is that kind of
enthusiastic, gung-ho. And, I don't think I thought about this then, but over time, I really came to see myself as living out my faith through my life and my actions more than my words. I
see.
To be careful not to be preachy and a false witness, right? I was pretty sure I wasn't a perfect Christian. So I think I resisted some of that, take the stage and tell people be at risk of telling people you're a great Christian. I think that's, to this day, I think that's a risk in our faith. I'd rather stand in front of people and say, I'm a broken sinner than tell them I'm that great. So,
well, that's the gospel, right? I mean, we don't, it's sort of like, I've been in Alcoholics Anonymous forever, right? 30 years almost, but it's, you always say, I'm Charlie, I'm an alcoholic.
yes.
You never say, no, I got on the other side of this, so I don't have that anymore, right? I'm a sinner, which is why Christ came to die for us. And we continue to be sinners, we continue not to quite measure up to God's standards, if you will. So, so I don't just sit there, and when people do say to me, boy, what an influence he's had, or he's a great Christian, I go like, oh, let's time out on that, let's take it easy.
I love that sign that's in front of little country churches that says, this is a hospital for sinners, right? Because when we become holy, we become haughty, and that's just the first step that comes before a downfall. The Bible's quite clear about that pride.
So let's transition. So when you got out of college, where was your next stop?
I came out of college at the very young age of 21, and took my first job in Cincinnati, Ohio at Procter & Gamble. I was blessed. I had 3 great job offers. There were very few women coming out of MBA programs, so I had an opportunity at General Mills, at AT&T, and at Procter & Gamble. And I chose Cincinnati. I chose Procter & Gamble because I had relatives in Cincinnati, and thought that would be safe. And went there. I also chose it because I knew I was young, and despite the fact that I had 2 degrees, I knew that I needed to learn a lot more. And Procter & Gamble was respected as an incredible training company that would really teach me.
Yeah, that's what I've always heard. So what was your starting salary?
$19,000.
Okay,
Still
great.
have the piece of paper in my file where the boss wrote it on a piece of stationery. Yes, I remember.
Were you the only woman that actually joined at that time in that cohort, if you will? Because it's probably a fairly sizable cohort.
There were 60 people that started at Procter & Gamble that fall. I was not the only woman, but I was definitely one of very few. I think they had 3 senior women in the company at that point in time.
So what year would that have been? like 78, 79? 78? Yeah. And how were you, did you feel like they were, as sort of one of these junior executives or whatever they considered you, okay? How did they treat you vis-a-vis how they treated the majority, who were the men?
Procter & Gamble was an extremely professional company, and I was always treated professionally. I had absolutely zero recollections of anything other than professional conversations with my supervisors. I felt like, and I was young, but I felt like I was getting the same training. I could ask the same questions. Now, there were snafu days. Like, I was in the big corner office, the big boss's office, with a project team, and they all got kind of down in kind of a huddle. And he looked at us all and he said, "We're going to do an end run." And I was terrified. I didn't know if we were supposed to jump, twist, head out for the door. I had no idea what the action to that was. I'm proud to say I have now learned what an end run is. But, there were moments of dysfunction like that, right, where the analogies, the word pictures didn't work for me. And I would tell you that went on a very long time in my career. I had to get very comfortable saying, no, I don't know the baseball scores. No, I don't know what an end run is. And, no.
One of the things that I've noticed with women, I'm talking women that are younger than me generally, okay? Well, some of the same. But I always give this advice. I said, never never stop being a woman. Okay. Don't become one of the guys, if you will, in the corporation, so that you fit in better. Because I've seen some of these women that they actually gave up their femininity. Okay. And you must have observed this. What are your thoughts around that, as advice to young ladies that are moving into these leadership tracks?
When I started, it was hard to figure out because you didn't have many people to look towards. Even like figuring out what to wear to work. I wore navy blue and black suits with a silk bow tie for the first 5 years because it looked like what everybody else had on. And, we now call them banker suits and we laugh at how stupid we look. But it was kind of the only cue card you had was wear navy and black and, kind of mimic the tie so that you fit in, right? I was probably 32 before anyone suggested that I could dress in a feminine fashion. I could wear a bright color. I could, I didn't get much counsel. And finally I was sent to a leader.
That's 11 years later.
No, it was a long time. And finally I got coached by in media training, how to, put yourself in front of the camera for a television interview. And she said, "You're the head of marketing now. You should be wearing purple. Your glasses should be red. You should wear your hair stylish. You should, And I'm like, well, no one ever told me that. So that's when I started wearing bright blue instead of navy blue.
Well, how about when you were coming up and so you get through those first 5 years of the what's it called? The banker suit? Okay, the banker suit. Did you ever have find yourself saying, I need to act more like a man and less like a woman, or did that I need to be tougher, or you see what I'm saying? In other words, give up some of those characteristics that God baked in you as a woman, right? So did you ever have that and you thought about it yourself, and how did you get through that, or it's a decision point, I would think.
And it's quite confusing because as a woman, you get lots of conflicting feedback. I'll give you a specific story, which is the day I figured out I had to be Cheryl and I had to start ignoring this goofy feedback. I was in a meeting leading a project team, and my boss was observing. Afterwards, he pulls me out in the hall and he said, "You need to be stronger. You need to have anger in your voice, pound the table, and you may need to swear." And he said, "No one's going to take you seriously if you don't do these things." So I listened. I did respect him. He was a good boss. Went home and thought about it and tried to figure out what that would look like in my style. So next.
What did you think when you thought about it? You said, I went home and I thought about it. Because these are the things that shape us. You get advice from a lot of people. Then you think about it. That's why I'm asking, how did you think about it?
I wanted to come back looking stronger in that meeting, but not swearing. That's basically the boundary I picked. I said, I can be stronger. I can speak louder. I might even, use a pound on the table for emphasis, but I'm not going to swear. That's not who I am. But here was the problem. I executed my plan. The boss pulled me out in the hall again, and he said, "Would you please not get emotional in meetings?"
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
Baffling.
See, that's the man card. See, that's the man card coming out, right? So now you sit there. Now I'm too assertive. Okay. In fact, I'm so assertive, and he's now judging me. He's not judging my assertiveness anymore. Now it's too emotional in the way the presentation. What do you do with that?
Exactly what I said to him. I said, you have to pick a column because I can't do anything with that feedback. But the important thing is that's the last day I ever accepted feedback on my leadership style because it was too confusing to take all these other, cues from people that were designed differently than me. And out of that, I chose what my style would be. I'm very thoughtful, I'd say rational. I'm pretty calm in voice tone, pretty steady. I don't have temper tantrums. And on the other end, I don't get particularly emotional and cry. And I probably chose a bit of a middle road because it felt maybe safe up against this feedback I'd received. But I really tempered my leadership to be a style that I was comfortable with rather than trying to figure out how to be like someone else. Now, I deeply respect men, but I don't know how, and I don't want to be a man. I really like who God created to be.
Well, that's great. So how old do you think? So this is what we go through in our 20s, and I think it was more. There's a particular challenge, I should say, for women, right, going through their 20s, and who are they going to come out at? When did you finally? You settle. So there's one thing to say, well, this is who I'm going to be and I'm going to be comfortable with it. And then what you're doing is you're adjusting it from there until one day you don't think about it anymore. That's who you are. At what
35.
age was that? 35 years old. So it took those 14, 15 years to finally say, this is the leader that I am as a female in business.
Now, I would highly recommend that women try to get there sooner, because here's what it is. It's getting comfortable with your design and confident that God will use you as a positive impact on the organization with your unique strengths. I wish I'd met things like the Strength Finder assessment when I was in my 20s, right? That says, Cheryl, you're a high achiever, you're responsible, faith and belief are deeply important. I wish I'd had more guidance in how to lean into my strengths and be confident in them, and to, instead of taking all this feedback, help others understand how to best use me the way I'm designed. And that's what I say to young women now. Figure out how you're designed and explain yourselves to others that are struggling to understand you. Right? Because it happens all the time at work. You get all kinds of performance feedback or leadership feedback. And so I just really believe we have a responsibility to get to know ourselves, our design, and to help our supervisors and colleagues know us and know how best to tap into what we're good at, right? I have never hoped that I would be good at everything. That's not a realistic thing. So,
no, but how is it? As you're going through on your way to defining getting comfortable with who you are, okay, your personal definition of who you are, there must have been mentors along the way. Yet the difficulty is there weren't a lot of female leaders to mentor you, right? So how did you? And I think that's still true in business. All right. So how do you, what advice do you give to young ladies on this on mentoring, and is mentoring important, and how do you go about it, and how do you work with mentors? What are your thoughts all around that?
It would be immensely valuable. To your point, there weren't a lot of options when I was coming up the ranks. I mentioned earlier, my dad was probably my greatest business mentor, and I called him every week of my career until he passed 10 years ago. I picked a few senior women and found aspects of them that I wanted to model or take their role model. For example, when I started being a leader in the restaurant industry, Sally Smith was running Buffalo Wild Wings. She was a woman. She was strong, but very female. She dressed professionally. She spoke wisely. She had a financial background. She wore a cross around her neck. She expressed her faith publicly. And she was open to questions. You could ask Sally, how did you handle this situation? And she'd be happy to talk to you. In fact,
how old were you when you met Sally?
Closer to 40. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And I modeled after her for a very long time. She was one of the most significant females, mostly watching from afar, but taking notes as to how she carried herself, how she spoke, how she explained things. when I was at Popeyes as CEO, she was CEO of Buffalo Wild Wings, and I would watch her at investor conferences, and then I would try to wear the same outfit in Popeye's Deli. It served me well.
By the way, what color were her outfits?
She wore really beautiful pantsuits, and so I kind of just
Okay.
that outfit for a good
But that's the influence of a mentor, right? It's interesting that you said that you watched her from afar. But you called your dad every week? Did you have sort of these people that you didn't have people within the company that mentored you, is what I'm hearing, females, right? So you wind up having female mentors from afar that you can watch. Did you have any that you stayed in touch with, even if it was maybe bi-monthly or quarterly even, or maybe at that conference that happened twice a year? You follow me?
The food service industry has an amazing organization called the Women's Food Service Forum. And we were 2,000 women working our careers through the restaurant industry. That became really my place of learning, sharing stories, networking with people. And to this day, that's a really important organization in the restaurant industry because they pour into young women. And there's lots of mentoring going on, lots of.
When did that come? You ended that when you were in your 40s? Was that there all along?
It's a very young
your career?
Organization. I came into the restaurant business at approximately 37. And it was a very young, new organization, small in stature, and then grew to be this huge, successful learning organization for women. And I would tell you today that we've developed the careers of many, many women leaders in that organization. That became the touch point for mentoring and networking.
So how does that happen? What did they do? Like you said, they have been responsible for the careers, the leadership careers of many women, right? So what did they do? What made it work so well, and why were they effective?
Well, the first thing they did is they did market research to find out from senior executives what skill gaps women had or leadership gaps that needed to be developed. And they created a whole learning platform. I believe there were 8 areas of the learning platform, and then they created all the conference content around those things. So, for example, women lacked a lot of confidence in finance, so they always had a course on finance at the conference so that you could be in a safe place to ask questions and dig in and really learn how a balance sheet works. Or how the stock market works, and those kinds of things that women were maybe a little less comfortable with in public market companies. They also invested in helping you kind of position yourself. They would teach you how to do a resume, how to do a headshot for an interview process, how to present yourself effectively, how to articulate your results, right? And I think the most important thing, and this is a word I now use very, very often, is they created a safe place for women to learn and grow. I think as leaders, it's come to my attention that just like in our homes and communities, if we want to have deep, impactful relationships, they must start with a safe place, a safe environment to bring your whole self and your curious questions and your unknowns that you've never been comfortable.
Why was there a necessity to create a safe place for women to bring their whole self? Isn't the places where they work safe places? Why, or I should say, why aren't they safe places?
They're not safe places, and they're still not today for a whole host of reasons. I think the greatest reason they're not safe is no one's taking the time to understand how women are different from men, and allowing those differences to coexist. The frequently told story is, women always either talk too much or they cry when they get upset. Well, we've got to get used to however women show up at work. If they are inclined to get tears instead of look tough all the time. We got to get comfortable with that. If women tend to talk softly, we've got to get more comfortable with that. If women tend to be more, collaborative, which, by the way, I think they often are, because they're paying attention to relationship dynamics, perhaps. We need to welcome that capability in and stop judging women when they don't sync up exactly with the style points of a man, just like that story I just told, because they don't look tough, or they don't look loud, or they don't swear. I mean, a safe place is when you can safely be who God designed you to be. Now, the reason I know this is still true is in the stage of life that I am now, I almost exclusively spend my time either in board work or in mentoring women, particularly women of faith. And I can tell you today that when I create a discipleship group with 10 senior Christian women in it, like C-suite women, the first thing they say is, I've never been in a place safe like this to talk about what my struggles are in life or my challenges at work. This is a gift from heaven to have a safe place to go and speak.
And you're talking about women that are probably in their early 40s, mid 40s. And this is the first, it sure says something about, how we run our companies.
I give a lot of grace. We know what we know as human beings, but I think we would not have to talk all the time about things like diversity and inclusion if we simply said, I'm interested in every person and how God wired them to be. And I'm okay if we do it a little differently, because maybe the way you see something will complement the way I see it and will be better. There's all that research that says differences make for better problem solving. I mean, this isn't a fact problem. We know that differences lead to better decision-making outcomes because we see things from different vantage points, but we're just less comfortable. If people are not like us, we're just less comfortable. And that's the opportunity we're missing. I think
it sounds, so the way you present it, it sounds quite honestly, it sounds so simple. That basically just says, accept people for whom they are, right? That's it. All right. And they have different personalities, they have different ways, they have different experiences. Okay. They could be different genders, they could be a different race, they got different nationalities, right? You've got all of this kind of blend together, but it all brings, if we accept them for who they are rather than jam them into some sort of a mold of who we want them to be, then we're actually going to wind up with a much stronger organization that performs much better. Yes,
and I've spent my lifetime teaching senior leaders that you want to build a senior team with very diverse approaches, vantage points, and skill sets, because it'll be hard at the beginning to turn them into a team, but once you do, you will have a phenomenal advantage over a team that's a bunch of clones, right? Because they're going to miss stuff. They're going to miss really.
How did you come to this conclusion? You say this now like it's the absolute truth. It's written in the Word of God, right? I mean, so when did you come? You certainly, we go through life, like you said, through your 20s and 30s. You have to figure out who you are, right? We're very me-oriented, trying to fit in and everything. When did you come as a leader? When did you come about and say diversity is really important? It's really a major strength of a great leader, okay, to encourage diversity. So when did you come to that conclusion in your career?
I'm a voracious reader about leadership my whole adult life, trying to figure out what the traits of great leadership are. And I really did become fascinated by the work that Gallup did around how you engage people in an organization to create superior performance results. it's reflected in my book title today, because it was life-changing to me to understand there are conditions under which people perform their best work. And I wanted to know everything I could know about those conditions. In the Gallup study, they've done this now for 22 years, I believe, is when they measure, do you have a friend at work? Do you have clear communications? Do you feel trust in the work environment? Is someone invested in you? There's these 12 questions that they've asked every year in this survey, and the people that score the highest on these 12 questions are highly engaged in work, and their workplaces outperform financially other workplaces with low engagement. So I bought into the theory. It was based on good research and good math, and then I started to watch it and observe it in action. When I would come into a team and change up the skill sets on that team so that we'd have the full balance of the capabilities we need, but we would have some conflict because these were very different kinds of people, I became fascinated with how you get that team working together at their best. And then I would watch them outperform the daylights of the next team over, just always outperform. And it certainly happened to Popeyes. The team.
How old were you? How old were you at that time when you started to see those things?
I would have been 40 when I really understood it.
Okay.
And put a.
All right.
Today I apply it in the boardroom. I joke, but it's true. I won't join a board that does not have a full complement of skill sets and diverse backgrounds and experiences. I'm on one right now that has 2 women. There's an individual from India with a very strong technology background. There's finance people. There's people that know logistics. There's people that know marketing. There's people that know about talent. And now in the boardroom, they actually teach us to have a competency grid and look at our whole board on one grid to make sure we don't have gaps in how we're looking at business issues, gaps in skill, gaps in experience. So, many times over, I've just watched this get proven that while it is more difficult to storm and norm as a team when you're different, it's a formidable force once you get past that phase and start operating with really better capability than the team next to you.
Is there, as you mentioned this grid, right, for boards, I just want to touch on this for a second, then I want to kind of get back into your life. But it's something that's interested me. Someone said to me, if you look at the grid of the mix that you need on a board these days, a public board, if you're a white male, you're not in the grid. So has it swung too far? Or is that just a wrong statement? I don't know. I mean, I'm not on public board. Someone just mentioned that to me, and I went, "That's really unique." Because I've never seen the grid.
We are in a period of time in our culture right now where I would say we are like myopic, only talking about diversity, and perhaps from time you have to be a little myopic to correct, some of the imbalances, so to speak. If your board's never had a woman in it by now, you're behind. You should have 2 or 3 in a board of 9 to 12 people at a minimum. And so there's a reason why we've had to get so single-minded about it. But I hope and pray that our wits come back. And again, that we start looking for the best people, the best experiences, and a mix of people in the boardroom. And certainly not excluding all the skills and capabilities of men of any color. And so I just think it's a point in time, and we have to be better.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So I think you used the word, you said we've become so myopic, and maybe that overcorrection is what it takes to kind of get us back to some sort of a reasonable balance. And I don't disagree with that. It's hard to change things incrementally. When everybody's, when we're not in agreement, we haven't experienced the same things, So that's a great answer. But So let's go back to one of the things, if we want continual balance within business, we want this diversity, if you will, in business. We want diversity of females in business. So tell me how you went along in this man's world that you were in, this corporate world with Procter & Gamble. And then from Procter & Gamble, you went to
Gillette in Boston.
Gillette. And then you got into the food business after that, right? Right. So when you're into, was it the Gillette guy? Or did he own the New England Patriots yet?
To be honest, I know about Razor Blade.
Okay. That would have come up. End run would have come up at that time, right? But I'm just wondering, tell me a couple of stories on how, as a woman, you got the promotions. Why didn't you how did you beat out the guys?
Well, I think you have to be looking.
Were you married by the way, when did you get married?
I got married. So I've been married 41 years. I was young. My husband and I met at Procter & Gamble and married in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Okay, so here you go. So again, now the implicit discrimination comes into place, right? Or prejudice comes into place that, oh, she's now married and she's married to your husband's name, Chris. And, he's expected, he's going to go up the corporate ladder. And this young lady, she's going to wind up, she's very capable, but she's going to wind up getting pregnant and having children and staying home with children. And so we're just going to kind of watch Chris and ignore Cheryl.
Well,
you see, I mean, it's never talked about, but it's there. So how did you get past all that? Get me through that 25 to 35. Let's do that.
The first thing that happened is that when we decided to get married, I had an MBA and my husband didn't, and he wanted one. So we did leave Procter & Gamble after we got married because he wanted to go to Harvard Business School, and he did. I was successful getting a job at Gillette, which, to be honest, took a lot of work to get into a very successful company that kind of had their own entree points coming out of school. But I got a job at Gillette. We made that work. We then thought we'll live in New York the rest of our life because that's where two career people always live, in New York City. We lived there, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years before my company transferred me to North Carolina. And so the net of it is we moved 4 major times for me and 4 major times for my husband's career. And we did not plan it. Every time one of us had that decision point opportunity, we looked at all the facts in both the business and career side and also our family and where we stood. And we made a decision. And they were imperfect. And some of them we look back and go, oh, I think I'd do that one differently. And some of them went beautifully for both of us. But with the principle was we will make a decision that works for both of us. And we will make a decision that works for our family. And if the careers, conflict with that, we may take a step back from a career standpoint. So,
but that's a great analysis on the family side. Now give me the analysis on sort of in the business side, because you were at that time, you were working at that, when you went to Gillette, he stayed at P&G?
He went to Harvard Business School and I went to Gillette. And then after business school, I stayed at Gillette for another year. He moved to New York. We commuted. We didn't have children yet. And then I moved to Nabisco in New York. And then my company moved me to North Carolina. So he went to his company and said, can I work from North Carolina?
What company did he join after HBS?
He was a consultant.
Oh my God. He's on the road.
On the road all the time for like 15 years. And
so how old were you when you had the first? So you didn't answer my question. I'm going to go back to it. I got to go back to it. The promotion thing. How did you beat the guys? Okay. How did you win as a minority? Okay. In a man's world, how did you win? Because they have this implicit, like I said, prejudice that says, we can't make her the boss. We make her the boss, she's going to have a kid and she's going to be gone.
Hopefully I didn't run into many people with that worldview, but I had to find something I was really good at. And it turned out I was really good at new product innovation, finding an insight, a gap in customers' preferences, and creating a new product that filled it. And I'll give you a specific story that I think really answers your question directly. When I was 5 months pregnant with my first child, I was in charge of the candy business at Nabisco. That would have candy and gum. That would have been Lifesavers and Breast Savers and Carefree gum, Fruit Stripe gum, all these candy and gum products.
And you were running it. You were the general manager?
At this point. So I had a couple product managers working for me. But we were to bring forward a strategic plan, like a 5-year plan for that business in front of the president of the company. And we knew that by the time we made that presentation, I was going to be like 8 months pregnant. So we went off-site and we mapped out the consumer opportunity in that group. And I'll just focus on Lifesavers because it's a really fun story. Lifesavers was an old tire brand. Grandma gave you Lifesavers at church. They weren't very contemporary. They weren't going anywhere. So we created 2 new products. One was called Lifesavers Holes because everybody always wondered where the hole went. So we made the holes. There wasn't a hole. So we made holes, put them in a shaker container, sold them to kids. And then we also made Lifesavers Gummy Savers. So we go 8 months pregnant to the big offsite meeting, and we presented our big platform for innovation around these brands. And we named it the Strategic Defense Initiative because Reagan was president, and he was talking about Star Wars. So we made all of our presentation about Star Wars to make sure everybody knew how innovative we really were. And we told them we had tested these premises, and this was the answer. Well, the president and the board approved our strategic plan. Cheryl's 8 months pregnant, got back on the plane, flew home, and we started putting that plan into effect. The fun ending to the story is Lifesavers Gummy Savers turned out to be the biggest candy new product launch they'd ever launched. It became a $100 million business overnight. There were no really good, chewy, gummy products in the U.S. They were all those hard teddy bears from Germany that broke your teeth, basically. So it was very flavorful, very popular, very young, and really changed the game. They're still in the market. You can buy them at Walgreens tonight on your way home. And so coming up with game-changing new businesses that generated $100 million in revenue, that's how I got promoted. I got promoted by Christmas of that year to vice president of marketing in that company, and we moved. Yes.
So even then, results matter.
They always matter. Yes. Create some results, make people curious about how you got them, and they'll have to put you in play, right?
You would think, but I'm sure that there's some unfairness. There's some unfairness, but Nabisco seemed to be fair. They were a merit system. That was it. So what happened then? You get promoted at the same time you have an infant.
Yep.
How did all that work?
So
what do you mean removed?
The company relocated from New Jersey to North Carolina. So there was a lot that happened in that time frame. As I mentioned earlier, I always knew I wanted to be married and was committed to it. I wanted to have children. Both Chris and I did. It just wasn't something, we didn't debate whether you did these things. We did them, and we figured out how to do them to the best of our ability. So yes, we needed childcare. We always had to go through an interview process and find someone that we really trusted with our children to maintain our values and our home in good order. The move to North Carolina had a huge benefit because my parents lived in North Carolina. So we got closer to grandparents and siblings that could, at least be part of holidays and vacations and that kind of thing. And
it's interesting how that all sort of fit, that your parents were there. Oh, that's incredible that it happened at that time in your career.
We said, we don't really want to raise our children in city life in New York and New Jersey. So it did come together. My husband made the compromise because he, as I told you, started having to get on airplanes every week to go to his clients for Deloitte & Touche. But we had a really stable home, beautiful neighborhood, good church. we lived in Winston-Salem, North Carolina for 7 years when our first daughter was young, a newborn, and it was a really good time for our family.
Are your kids all are they like one of these 18-month apart things?
My second child was born 5.5 years later, and I actually took a break from work after she was born for a couple of years, and then I went into the restaurant business.
Tell me about the break. Tell me about that thinking that you went through. Because you're sitting there, everything's fine. You get pregnant again and you work through the pregnancy. You have great responsibility. Your parents are there helping you. Your husband is doing what he does, being on the road and all that, but still you're grounded. You're all grounded. You're in a community. You have that second child, second daughter. What was the thinking?
Well,
what went on then?
I would say to young parents is these are always multidimensional questions. They are never just which job or promotion should I take, or what should we do now that I have 2 children? They're multifaceted. So this one, to explain, my husband's parents were aging and having health problems in Michigan. He was a long way from home. After our second child, I decided the place that I worked was no longer a place that I felt comfortable being a leader. It had a culture that I didn't line up well with. It had values that I didn't share. And now I'm teaching the values, right? Because you're a vice president. So you got to decide, is this where I'm going to work? So I made a values judgment and said to my husband, I'm ready to leave this. I've got to work somewhere. I'm more.
How old were you then? How old were 35. You then? Yeah. Okay. So that's core, man, to your career. 35. I mean, we're talking CEO promotion stuff at 41, right, or 42 in corporate. So you're right there.
I would have called that a hugely risky break. But I tell young mothers.
Yeah, but what's interesting, one thing is you talked about values. Their values were not your values. Now, that didn't happen like one day they weren't. You lived with that quite a while. Yeah. When did you finally, what was happening to you maybe? I don't know if it was happening to you physically or emotionally or intellectually, where you finally said, no. You said earlier in our conversation at 35, I figured out who I was. I finally decided on it. This all seems to hit at the same time. So talk about that period a bit, because values is another issue. Now, this is different than women. I do want to come back to the decisions you made as a family.
So, you're right. I had worked for this company 7 years, and their values, I had not shared their values from the beginning. It was a work hard, play hard environment. There was quite a bit of bad behavior going on in the evenings, even at lunch, inappropriate stuff. Even in right. business decisions, like they would send forecasts to the home office that we all knew weren't true. I mean, just lots of marginal values, kind of marginal integrity type stuff. And
these are the kind of people you don't want your kids to grow up to be like, right?
Also don't want to train anybody up in that kind of place. And when you become a director or a vice president of a company, you should look around and say, are we training up the next generation of leaders as we should with good values? Or are we just a bunch of bad examples? And I looked around and honestly said, I don't want my name on any of this. I don't ever want to say that this is what leadership looks like. And boy, you need to make that choice when you get into the position of, I was teaching leadership behaviors now at this point. I have a team of 35 people in the marketing department looking to me for direction on how things should be done. And I had to make a firm call that I would not participate in the way that they made decisions and taught decisions and behaved after work. Had to separate. And there were a couple.
But that's a career that when you made that decision, that's a career-ending decision in that particular company, okay? You are not one of us. You're not to be trusted to be one, right? I mean, we want to continue to have our bad behavior at night and do our things. You're not invited.
No, and you don't want to be, the preacher either. You don't want to walk around all day trying to win these people over. the other piece of it going on is the boss I had was not supportive of me being a working mother. And he basically said, you can be a working mother, but I need to never, ever know that you're a working mother. That was a game breaker. That was the end of the road.
You told me earlier you never had a boss that looked that way. But yeah, here he is. He's right in front of you.
Yeah, I quit from that boss. It wasn't a hard decision. I was not respected for my capability at work, and I was not valued as a whole person. That included my family and my decision, to have children.
So what you've done, what you did at 35, you're this fast track female executive. You invented another $100 million product. Okay. You're in the wrong place to kind of go forward, right? Because you'd have to sell out personally, which you weren't willing to do. So what you were painting a picture of is Cheryl hit the wall professionally. You hit the wall. So what were the conversations with you and Chris about what do I do? Now we're having having our second child. What do we do now? Now I want to go back to the family
Chris
again.
wanted to get back to Michigan, and he could do that with the firm that he worked for because Deloitte had offices in all the major cities. So we started with that principle that he could get back his career to Detroit. Much more challenging for me. There were very few food companies in Detroit. But strangely enough, it took 2 years for this to happen. I'd call it networking. I didn't talk to 100 people, but, kept asking people about opportunities in that area. I did some consulting projects for a bit. And then one of my, one female role model I had was in New York City running an ad agency. And she was really colorful, bigger than life person. We didn't have a lot in common, but we really did love each other. She liked my innovation, and I was kind of colorful from a business standpoint. She kind of had.
And if she was in New York and an executive, then she only wore
today,
black.
That is true. You only could wear black. She was classy. She was interesting. But I said,
I love it. Now, by now, you're basically you left the corporation. Yeah, and so you've got 2 babies. Well, you got a 6-year-old and an infant, and now you're sitting here trying to figure out what I'm going to do in Michigan. So talk about this lady again. So this is your mentor in New York.
She was an advisor to Tom Monahan at Domino's Pizza. And I didn't know that. So I was really struck by that. And my rule for my next job was I had to work for a values-based leader. I didn't say Christian per se, but I said I got to know that they have good values and they show up at work. So I put those 2 things together. I said, Tom Monahan's pretty interesting. I'm going to call Laurel. And I called Laurel, and she goes, why would you want to work in the pizza business? And I said, well, to be honest, because I live down the street from a pizza company, and it has a values-based leader, but I don't know him. Can you introduce me? And she goes, well, of course I can introduce you. But why do you want to do that? And yes, I can introduce you. Well, the interesting thing is the chief marketing officer role was open. So he called me like an hour later after she called, because of course she said, I know Cheryl, I know the quality of her work. This is something you remember if you take a break from work as a young mother.
This must be what, 1990 or so?
93.
93, okay.
People who know you still know you, and they still know your capabilities. So she vouched for me. Tom desperately needed a marketing person. He had never had a female work for him in his whole life, so he was a little freaked out about that. But he had a meeting with me, and at the lunch, he wrote an offer on a napkin and handed it to me. And I said, well, I'm so honored. I'm just kind of floored, that you made me an offer in our first conversation. And I said, I will, really take that to heart, and I'll call you back on Monday. He goes, no, you won't. You will answer me right here. Well, what I didn't know, he owned the Detroit Tigers at the time. I mean, he was a deal guy, right? And this was just a deal. And he put the term.
And he's an entrepreneur too. He's not a corporate guy, right? He's an entrepreneur. I met him, by the way, and I'll tell you, that's another story.
He was not a corporate guy, totally entrepreneur. Didn't know any of the rules of corporate life and did it his way. And so I'm sitting there going, what do I do? I don't know how to accept a job over lunch. So I said, well, excuse me, I've got to go make a phone call. I went out in the parking lot and called my dad. And I said, here's the offer. Here's what he's asking me to do. It seems okay. What do you think? Am I missing anything? We talked it over, went back in and said, yes, started the following Monday morning. So it was crazy.
So you took that's the first offer that you got for $19,000 was given to you that way too, you said.
I don't know what it is about these pieces of paper pushed across the table, but
it must be you. It's not them. Yeah. Is that how Chris proposed? He gave you a little piece of paper and said, what do you think? I love it. Okay. So you go to work for Tom.
Yes.
It's Monahan, right? Yeah. So he is a renowned Catholic businessman up there in Michigan. All right. And by then, though, he was very, very successful. He started that business in what year? What was that?
I don't know that I can tell you the year, but that he started the company. But, he started with an ambition to have about 200 pizza stores. And he had 5,000 or 6,000 by the time I met him. And now there's, I think, 12,000.
I think I met him in the late 70s. I went to Pizza Hut. They were interested in getting an accounting system. We were selling accounting systems on IBM computers, but our focus was really CPAs. We were automating CPA offices, but we were early on. And so being opportunistic, IBM turned us on to this opportunity. So I went up there and I visited with him. And here I am. Oh my gosh, I must have been 25, and I'm talking to this guy. He had just gotten started. It was a dumpy office. I remember that. And he says, I'm going to buy this computer. I think it's the right computer. I said, so what are your plans? What do you need this for? And he went and he painted the sky on what he was going to do. And I just said, this is ridiculous. I never met anybody like this. I said to my son, this is ridiculous. This guy, if you're going to do that, I said, we really can't help you. You need much more than I have. And that was the last time I talked to him. I left his office, got on my plane and left. But and then I turned around and I'm like, now I'm buying Domino's Pizza next year, because he opened up, 50 stores in Atlanta. The guy was true to his word, no doubt about it. Really interesting entrepreneur.
Very visionary. Did things. He didn't know what he didn't know. I was being the marketing leader. He used to always say to me, I don't know anything about marketing. And I say, Tom, you were the person who invented the door hanger. He would put an ad on your apartment door with the phone number to call Domino's for pizza. What you didn't know is he wrote a number on the bottom of your door hanger so he could track your apartment and find out who was buying his pizza. He did CRM marketing before anyone had an acronym for it, and tracked his customers in a database way. And so I told him, actually, Tom, you're the most brilliant marketer I've ever worked for, because he thought this stuff up well ahead of his years, and it changed the game for his competitors.
Well, then so you said he didn't know what to do with me. He never had a female working for him, right? Female executive. Okay. So how did that turn out? Now you're educating him. You're the first female. So however you do and however you act, that's how he's going to say that's how female executives are, right? So there's this great responsibility on you. How did that go?
And one was you had to wear a skirt. So that was the first getting used to one another. Is he told me right out of the box that I had to wear a skirt, and they had to be long. I mean, he cared about the length of your skirt too, not just the skirt. So, I made adjustments and he made adjustments. He had to get used to my personality. I challenged his team a lot because I was heading up product innovation, and they hadn't changed anything for a really long time. But Tom, because he was an entrepreneur, he would actually listen to my ideas. He would allow them to get put out on the table. He would allow the debate, and he gave me a window, of opportunity to really lead innovation in an environment that really wasn't very used to a woman leader or innovative thinking. My favorite story about working for Tom Monahan, though, is I brought him an idea called a heated delivery bag. And if you remember, pizzas used to just come in a kind of a warmer bag with a flap. And they used to always be cold when they got to your house. And cold pizza is kind of bad pizza. So I saw at this big convention, somebody had created this idea of a disc that you heated up and put in that bag with the pizza. And it kept the pizza the same temperature, oven hot, all the way to the front door. Now, the bad news was this thing looked like a sixth grade science project. It was hearing, not so much. It had duct tape. It had wires hanging off. It probably could burn something down. But it was fascinating to me that there was the concept. So I went to him and I said, we've got to do this. We have got to have hot pizza. That'll be the competitive win. My peers thought I was nuts. Every time I presented it at the weekly executive meeting, it was just every reason under the sun why it would fail. They thought it was too early in the technology. We didn't want to be the first to market. We didn't want to take the risk that the darn thing would break or not perform. We had to ask our franchisees to invest in it. That was a bad idea. Everything about it was a bad idea. For some reason, I was unafraid, and I just kept coming back. The seventh time I presented it, and they poo-pooed all over it again, I followed Tom back to his office after this.
I can't believe it must have been, here she comes again, right?
It did not bother him that I followed him. He knew that I wasn't giving up. And I sat across from him and I said, Tom, do you want to be here the day that our competitor launches a heated pizza bag when we're supposed to be the people that own delivered pizza? Is that where you want this company to be? And he said, no, we're going to launch this heat wave bag.
That was a great close.
And
I love that.
The competitor didn't launch it for 20 years. We had a competitive advantage for 20 years. Now, here's the other piece, though, that I always have to acknowledge. My peers were right on a lot of things. The dome did break. We did.
I love you that you're so honest about this.
I should have listened. There's a lot of things we could have done better. But the net of it is we were first to market. We won the market share position and stayed ahead of our competitor for a very long time because of that technology.
So what were they, and when you say your peers were right about a lot of things, what was the one thing that that you dismissed that showed up as being an issue?
The percentage of them that failed was very high. And when they failed, you had to send them back to be restored, right? Repaired, restored. It was expensive to do that. So they were not reliable. And so, a franchise owner would show you, he'd have a stack of working ones and he'd have a stack of busted ones. And, my name was on all of them, including the busted ones. It was flat. But, the net of it was we embraced the technology that they use to this day. Today it's wireless, so there's no cords. It's all done through waves technology.
No, I think it's great. Cool. So then how long did you stay with Tom?
I was at the company almost 7 years, but he decided to sell the company after 5 years. And he sold it to Bain Capital, a private equity firm. I didn't know that was his goal. Now, a lot of people look back and say, well, you were supposed to dress it up for a sale. You got the sales going and then he sold it. But so be it. That was his personal goal. He wanted to untangle his resources so that he could give a lot of money away the day we sold the company for $1.1 billion to Bain, the headline of the Detroit paper said, "I am going to die broke." And it was a picture of Tom Monahan announcing the sale of Domino's Pizza. And in fact, that's been his goal ever since. The CFO at Domino's used to say, "Does he understand how long he's going to live? We just don't want to go broke too fast." But to Tom's credit, he has
has he held true to that headline?
He's given away millions and millions of dollars. On the day of the sale, he gave family members the portion he intended for family members and told them that was it, and the rest will be given away. And then I believe he is still in the, like the top 10 donors to the Catholic Church in the world. He's been just a generous.
How old was he when he sold?
It would be like 1998-ish, so 34 years ago. I don't know, to be honest. It's like in his late 70s, early 80s now. So,
perhaps, so he'd have been 50. Late 40s, early 50s. So from that point on, he went from being an entrepreneur, business operator of this huge company to being a philanthropist full time.
Absolutely.
And community developer. Because didn't he do a lot of work in rebuilding Detroit? Was that him
that
I'm thinking of?
As the family that owned Little Caesars did a lot more of that. Tom invested in schools.
Okay.
He built all new Catholic schools in the Ann Arbor area. He built a Catholic university named Ave Maria that's now based in southern Florida near Naples. He opened a convent for conservative nuns because he didn't think there were enough conservative nuns in the Catholic Church. He did lots of interesting work. He would support mission work, like in Guatemala at the time. I remember the nuns called up the office. I was in his office one day, and the nuns needed a Jeep in Guatemala, and he bought them a Jeep. And so just generous man, and very devout Catholic, kind of but he was a Catholic of the Latin Church, the original Latin Mass Church, and has remained very true to that.
What a great! So then, how did he, when he was going to sell the company, when you joined him, you didn't know he was going to sell the company, right? So when did you know? Like, well, when did he tell you? I mean, was it the day of the sale, or he must have told you? You were an executive. You were sort of his right man, quote man. I don't want to say it that way.
Yeah, our team did all the sale presentations to potential buyers. So he told us as a group. He brought in investment bankers to explain how the process would work. I wrote a big part of the presentation on the brand and our products and what was unique about us. I also told the franchising story and why it was an asset-light model, generated a lot of cash, had a really good CFO. So we did a roadshow and had a very competitive bid for the company, and then Bain won that bid. And probably the naive part of me is I didn't really understand what was going to happen when Tom left, right? I didn't have that really thought through. And we, of course, got a new CEO who had never been in the pizza business and certainly was not an entrepreneur. So it was a huge change in the leadership of the company. But the individual was very capable. I probably would have stayed a very long time, but I realized with a brand new CEO, there wasn't going to be an opening at the leadership level in that company for a very long time. And so I got recruited to go to Yum Brands in Louisville and run KFC, and that was when I left the company.
What did you learn? How long did you work for that new leader, the person that replaced Tom? 2 years. What did you learn from that? So here's somebody coming in cold into filling the shoes of a values-based leader and an entrepreneur. And so this corporate guy comes in. I'm sure he was a corporate guy. Yeah. Okay. What did you learn about, because here he is taking over a new operation. that they bought for a significant amount of money, and you had that opportunity later in your career. So what did you learn from him? What impact did he have on you?
He had a lot more corporate experience. So particularly things like the importance of talent in every job. He did a lot of assessment work on us, a lot of executive coaching work. He wanted top talent in every job. He rotated people in jobs. I actually didn't do that rotation, but the people who did really became better general managers out of his investment in them. And he took incentive pay really seriously. We had the best pay structure I'd ever seen in my life. All of it, a huge percentage of it incentive pay, but it was like, if you want to run hard, there's a huge financial win. And then he definitely valued a certain kind of culture. I would describe his culture as he built a really tight, almost sportsman-like camaraderie with a lot of dinners at his house, a lot of personal gifts to you and those kinds of things. Like he gave us all these Baccarat crystal sets when we had good performance at something. So I have a boatload of Baccarat crystal that's still in the box. But he did some very, powerful things to bring talent and team together and create culture and performance. And that was probably the first time I'd really watched that up close.
That reminds me of somebody that I worked with who had a lot of the very same, did the very same things. It was a guy who worked for a guy named Sterling Williams, who was the founder of Sterling Software down in Dallas, Texas. And that grew into a very, very big company. Yeah. He was that way. He was, I could, when you describe it all, I mean, he had incredible incentive pay. He was very big on giving you personal gifts. He was very big on bringing you and your spouse together in these sort of president's meetings that we had, in good locations. He was a tough boss. I don't remember him rotating functions, but he wasn't ashamed to take a guy from products and put him in charge of services, that kind of a thing. It was very interesting that there was, he had a lot of that background. An extraordinarily smart guy. You just could not get, he could size up a company and where they are and where they're headed in minutes. Okay. And he did not suffer fools lightly. It was ugly when he ran into them, but I learned so much from him. So then, but so did you get picked off but wait a second, then we go to personal life. We put that on hold for a second. You moved to Michigan, went to work for Tom. You had 2 daughters. What happened in that 7 years?
Yeah, those were good
with the family.
Again, we stayed in one place, got involved in the community, lived near Chris's family, which was rich. And actually we lived there in the years that his father declined and eventually passed. So the kids got to know their grandpa really well. So it's a good place to be. It's also when we fell in love with Northern Michigan. We have had a home in Northern Michigan the rest of our life because of those years and all the good memories of being on Lake Michigan. So it was very formative years for our kids because they would have been 2 and 7 when we moved there. The elementary school years are very rich. When we left there to go to Louisville, to be honest, one of the breaks we wanted to make is we weren't happy with our daughter's high school. She was just entering high school. And education is super important in our family and a school that is both strong academically and strong in character traits. So we were pretty happy to remove our children from that world and start afresh in Louisville. I will tell you that ended up being one of our biggest frustrations of parenting was trying to find schools with a balance of demanding academics and demanding character.
Well, by taking that job in Louisville, you were the catalyst for the move, right? So now Chris is leaving his family, grandma and grandpa are left behind, and now you move into a place where there is no support from either parents, right?
Louisville was the first time Chris stopped working. He worked for a short time when we moved to Louisville, but then we had a teenager at home and we had a child entering middle school. And we looked, and I had a ridiculously huge job, and we looked at each other and said, this is not going to work. And at least not in a way that we were comfortable with it. So,
So did you have, when you moved down there, how many children did you have? 2 children. How many, you have, how many
now.
kids? Oh, you have 3 now. We haven't gotten to the third one yet. I didn't want the third one to get lost in this story. Okay.
In the interest of time, I should tell you about our third daughter because we actually did not meet her until, let's see, our daughters were 13 and 18 when we met her. We adopted Katya. She was born and raised in Russia. Ended up in an orphanage for very bright children, very bright, and then adopted by a single mother who brought her to the United States along with 2 other children, and then got completely overwhelmed. She'd never been a mother before, and now she had 3 children, and they were all teenagers. So she panicked and basically gave Katya back, so to speak, which is terribly sad for Katya, but the benefit to us is that's when we got Katya, is we took her into our home as our third daughter. She was 11.
Oh.
Yes.
She was 11?
And has now been with us 17 years. So that's our...
Oh, that's fantastic. And that happened in Louisville?
We adopted her right after Louisville. So we were back.
Okay. So tell me about this. How did you get to this? Like you said, I had a really big job. We moved. We had 2 teenage daughters. How do you make that? This is also from a family standpoint, how do you have that conversation with Chris? And how do you get to speaking honestly on the problem that you have? And then somebody's giving something up. You're receiving something else, but you're giving something up. So because you're both career people and you're very successful.
It comes down to whether you share the same priorities. And I have been blessed. My husband has always held family in the first position in terms of the value that he makes decisions around. And so at the time, he took a job in Louisville, but it didn't turn out great, so he wasn't in love with the job. We had a teenager that really needed some supervision. She was finding all kinds of ways to try new things and explore, and not very interested in school, even though she was very capable. So she just needed a lot more attention. And he was prepared to do that. He was determined to get her back on track from an academic standpoint, particularly. And so it wasn't as hard as it might sound because we knew what the benefits were of my job, and it was a huge opportunity for me from a learning standpoint, and a great company, global company that we thought we could be with for a very long time, and a great opportunity to create more generosity in the future, right? More money to give away. So we came to terms with that. And what he did is he went back and got a master's in history while he focused on Tracy's high school years and Katie's middle school years. And, we look back on it and the blessing. We had a really strong church, very good friends, and this time shaping our daughters that you look back now and say, that was exactly what we were supposed to do.
Yeah. I think the question is, it's interesting that the questioning is really more about him and his thinking and what he went through, not me asking you, because you were what? You took a job to be
president,
CEO?
My first president role as the U.S. KFC company. So, it was a huge step-up opportunity, and he wanted me to have that opportunity. One thing about Chris is he has always said he's always been my greatest encourager and supporter. He's always been willing to make compromises. We've tried to balance that out over a long period of time, but I had his full support. So it really was, okay, given I took this big job, how are we going to organize the family around our daughters so that they continue to flourish?
And I missed, what was the
KFC
job?
Restaurants.
Of KFC. Okay. And then you were, but that, you don't, I thought you were going to say the whole AFC corporate. The how did all that? How did you go from KFC?
Well, we might have.
Louisville. You know, I know that we can't go long here. I know we got to at some point. You're going to have to get on with life here because this is just. Well, your background's so interesting. I just wondered. How long was it before you made the move then to Atlanta?
It was a while because I got fired from KFC summarily. It was not a fun transition. And I took 4 years off, at which time I was asked to sit on the board of AFC Enterprises in Atlanta, which I did. And a year later, their CEO quit. The board, in the process of the search, turned to me and asked me if I would take that role. So it was very unexpected after a 4-year hiatus. And that was during that hiatus, we adopted our third daughter. We were busy with new things, new endeavors, and I really didn't have any plans to go back. So Popeyes was a wonderful capstone career thing that was unexpected and beautiful in so many ways. Great brand, great board, great opportunity, and then really the opportunity to teach these principles of servant leadership for the last 10 years of my career, which I treasure. And glad to have left.
How did you give me just a couple more minutes here? So tell me about this summarily fired piece. And then I only have really just a couple questions around this whole idea of this servant leadership and all. So because it's the core of your book is serving others with the eye on outstanding results. I mean, that's the uniqueness of the book, I think is. So what happened with the firing thing? I mean, again, you were doing when you were 35, you hit the wall because you said wrong place, wrong time. And then here you are now, top of your game as president. And then you could see there was something there when you said, I got summarily fired. You're still not pleased with what happened.
It was a public company and the performance results of KFC struggled during that time. And I was in charge. And so the boss, the CEO of the company, decided he wanted new leadership. And he told me that on a Friday night, and I was unemployed as of that day. But out of that, the segue to Popeyes is that every tenet of my leadership approach to the turnaround of Popeyes came from the learning that occurred by getting fired. Some of it good learning, some of it very painful. I was passionate about serving franchisees well. I think they're the heart and soul of the franchise business. So I did that at KFC, and I've done it the rest of my life. That's who I am. That's what I care about. But I learned that you have part of serving people is you have to create the conditions for performance, or you can't serve them well, right? Growing companies serve people well. Growing profits serve people well. Decline does not. And so I had to learn to marry both my competency in setting vision and direction for the firm with my deep-rooted leadership beliefs around serving people well, and find a way to bring those two pieces together. I called it the courage of leadership and the humility of leadership. The courage to set a daring destination for the people, a real stretch destination to take them to, but then the humility to make sure they get there, come alongside and develop them and grow them in capability so that they can perform their best work. And it's the combination of those two things that I think led to our phenomenal track record in the end.
So I like what you say there about this whole, that we need to, I came to believe I needed to be a servant leader. Okay. But I also learned that that one of the hallmarks of a servant leader is that it ends in achievement of high results, right? I mean, that's you put those two things together. I think that's incredible. You don't hear that. You hear people talk about servant leadership. They never talk about putting those two things together. You're the first person that I've talked to that have actually said that. They all spend all this time on, well, how can you serve and lead? And, well, there's autonomous leaders and then there's autocratic leaders and then, all this nonsense. But when did you become convicted on this idea of servant leadership? You did mention to me, I read a lot. I was very interested in leadership, and that becomes very clear in all that you've done. When did you say,
well,
this is it?
After having that hard ending at KFC, I decided to really discern what my leadership approach would be and to never live another day without practicing what I believe to be the best form of leadership. I had read everything Robert Greenleaf had written on servant leadership. I met and read everything Jim Collins had written, Good to Great, and Lencioni was another favorite. Lencioni, very much a values-based servant leadership type approach. And I said, I'm going to put this into practice, and I'm going to show people that when you take good care of people, you're creating an environment to bring out their best performance. So what does that mean? It means give them good direction, give them good coaching, give them good opportunities, stand behind them, correct them when they go amok, fire them if you have to, but your responsibility is to make sure the environment is such that they can grow and become the best version of themselves. And if you do that, they give you their best work, and your company outperforms the competition, and nobody can figure out why. So the marriage for me was all the ways in which we serve the people who have been entrusted to our care are to ensure that they can bring their best capability to the table and that we can outperform the competition, because that's how you serve everyone in the equation well, including, by the way, the shareholders who invest in our companies. So,
well, the results that you achieved, I mean, with Popeyes is just absolutely incredible. I mean, in your book, just seeing that stock chart, you go, like, that's a good angel investment. Okay. That's and it was a big company to start with. And you took it from, I'm not sure if it was $5 to $10 a share, but it went all the way up to $75 a share. I mean, that's a tremendous return.
The thesis, the measurement we made was our franchisees making more money, and we doubled their profitability. And they built 1,000 new restaurants. We made our owners a ton of money, and that ended up being the path making the shareholder a lot of money. So I often tell people I never looked at the share price. I never orchestrated it to move. You really don't have a whole lot of control over it other than to make sure the street understands how you're creating results and that you consistently do so. So.
Well, yeah. I mean, you don't have control over the stock price, but you certainly have control over the stock direction. Okay. And you prove that out. You can have a blip, within a year or 18 months, but you can't have long-term trends without long-term growth in revenue and profitability. And you did that. So congratulations on that. But the last question I had was just this, is why did you, here's your book, when you had your book, you used the term dare to serve, and you stick to that throughout the book. You don't really, I think maybe twice you mentioned the term servant leadership. Why did you not hang on that term, that lexicon, servant leadership from Greenleaf? And why did you go to this dare to serve sort of
because
lexicon,
the idea
if you will?
had to be refreshed. Servant leadership had not taken hold anywhere. It was not the center of leadership conversation. No one ever talked about it at business school or in leadership forums. We needed a new vocabulary. And I thought what we needed courage, which is the dare. We needed to really lean into the balancing force being humility, and we needed to bring performance into the equation. So I always say daring plus serving equals performance. And to me, that created a robust, fresh conversation that we could take to the street. I wanted to create one case study in a public company to convince other leaders to try to do the same. And that's what we published in the book. This is how we did it. These were the results. These are the personal stories behind it. And we wanted to basically give a testimony to others who were looking for a leadership approach in that vein.
Thank you. But there's two things I just want to say about the book that just really hit me. This one where where you're the new CEO. You put your team, you had retreats with your team. You're trying to come up with all of these elements for this new bold plan, right? And you stand in front of all of the franchisees, and it was like boom, right? I mean, like, who's this new CEO? She doesn't even know who we are. She's telling us where we're going to be and how great it's going to be. I just can't imagine what it was like for you to stand up there and have the feeling you must have had. Instead of like standing ovation, you got all this, is this for real? Kind of a question.
Yes, well, of course, they hadn't had a trustworthy leader for a long time.
That's what I mean, yeah.
I was just another guy with another crazy plan. And it took months, in fact, it took years to build trust. And we should never forget that as leaders. You gain trust by delivering for the people, not by talking about it.
Oh, boy. That's the quote of the interview. And that what you have to do. But at some point, when you take over, you do have to stand up and give that bold speech of where we're headed. I'm a leader worth following here. And we're gonna get there together is your message. But it was interesting that you've got to go through that first awful meeting and then sort of build from there. But you think you're here. But after the meeting, you're here, and then you realize it's going to be like the stock price. You got to build it over time. I will say I was very emotional reading one part in your book that, and maybe it's because of the age that I am right now, where I am in life, but you talk about the legacy. I think it was asked after the exit, after somebody came in and bought out Popeye's restaurants, right? What's that? AFC Enterprises got bought out, right? And you were called in, and the guy said, "You're great, you're gone," right? Thank you. And all these people, this team you built, all of the franchisees and friends that you had, that trust. What a wonderful, wonderful organization and community you built. And then in your book, you have all of these people quoting how grateful they were for working with you and with, AFC Enterprises. I was just touched so deeply by all of those quotes that you included from all of those people.
It's leadership.
What a gift.
When there's a sudden event like that, the board sold the company. There was nothing I or anyone else could do about it. You have to think of it as a sending out. And that's why those quotes are in the book. The event caused the sending out of a cadre of servant leaders into other companies, largely in the restaurant industry. And they're doing a fabulous job today. And that is the legacy of our Popeyes experience, is that we created a place that modeled dare to serve leadership and gave people the tools to take it with them on their journey. And that is the end game when you talk about legacy.
Well, I gave a presentation once on servant leadership, and I'm the last person that should really give it, but it was in Uganda to these younger entrepreneurs. And when I was thinking about this and researching it, the thing that struck me, and it's what I remember from the presentation, was great servant leaders always build great servant leaders. That's the legacy. That's how you know. That's how you know you really were a servant leader. So the dare to serve, how to drive superior results by serving others. We have talked for an hour and 58 minutes. Okay. Took us a little while to get started because of technology, but I want to thank you. This has been a great first meeting with my friend Cheryl Bachelder. Thank you so much.
It's been so good to be with you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah. And thank you all for joining us, Cheryl and I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did and you learned a lot. There's a lot to be learned here. So dare to serve. Thank you.